Yeah, that's,
Welcome, everyone, to the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Library. Because we're being recorded, I will say it is November 9th of 2023, and we are here this evening to hear from the illustrious Peter Rutledge Koch, author, designer, artist, and printer. My name is Donna McRae, and I serve as the head of Archives and Special Collections here at the Mansfield Library. The library has a long association with Peter, and we're privileged to hold a number of his works in special collections, 4 of which are on exhibit right now on the 4th floor, so 1 floor up from where we are right now, including the Lost Journals of Sacajawea by Deborah Erling. So I encourage everyone to go upstairs and take a look at that. The exhibit will be up until November 16th there. And I want to thank Michaela Connolly, who's in Archives and Special Collections, for designing and mounting that exhibit, and then also for doing the exhibit that's here on this floor in the glass cases, the Festina Lente, highlighting the letterpress printing and the book arts. So definitely take a look at those if you haven't already. I also want to thank some people from the library, Xavier Needler-Shorten, Adam Carroll, Audrey Dozer from the library for coordinating the marketing and technology for this presentation, and Missoula Community Access Television, MCAT, for filming and making this presentation available even after this evening. So thank you. And next, I want to be sure to thank and acknowledge the University of Montana Book Arts program, which is co-sponsoring this lecture along with the Mansfield Library. And so before I introduce Peter, I'm going to give Ashby Kinch, Professor of English Literature and Dean of the university's graduate school, a moment to say just a few words about the new Book Arts program, if you'd like.
so check the mic. I see that Kevin's having no trouble hearing back there.
Talk loud.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you, Donna, for agreeing to sponsor this event. Of course, we're always delighted when Peter's in our community. We know he pulls people out, and there's a rich and passionate, Kevin's over here doing this, interest in book arts here in Missoula, and that is what we're trying to cultivate. And we are, so as you heard, you know, everyone at University of Montana has a bunch of titles, but one of mine is director of the University of Montana Press. And if that's news to you that we have one, you're not alone, but it's a small press that has produced, you know, a couple of books per year in the last few years under my directorship. And the reason why we've gone to small scale publication is that, you know, we're a public institution without a lot of money to invest. But we think this book arts program has real potential. And one of those potentials has most to do with the students. We have incredible graduate students here in a wide range of fields that have shown a lot of interest in letterpress printing. And I have to give, you know, deep and profound thanks to David Axelrod, who has agreed to teach our inaugural book arts practicum course this semester, which has brought out 12 graduate students who are doing incredible work right off the bat. And so it's been really cool to see kind of from lark of an idea about a year and a half ago. Well, I mean, the actual idea goes back 10 years, but the recent manifestation that Peter said, I think we can get that press over to Montana. And then on a very cold and windy day in January, it arrived, and we found a spot for it in Schreiber, 127, and it's been there producing work, and that's what you want your press to do, is to make work. So a few of you saw a few of the samples that we've printed on the press at that second table over there. This is the crash commercialism portion. They are for sale, and we will continue to sell objects from the press. I left my card. We, you know, haven't laid prices out. You know, give us a good price and walk away with something if you want it. But certainly email me if you're interested in other objects, and if you're interested in donating. We are trying to build a fund that buys paper and ink and keeps the press rolling. We're gonna have to replace some parts coming up over the winter. So, you know, for people that are here, I'm sure this is a passion of yours. If that passion, if you have capacity as well, reach out to me. We have all kinds of ways that we think we, with really small investments, can keep this initiative rolling. We'll offer another course, like the one this fall, for undergraduates in the spring. And so the book arts mission and vision is to start producing literary, beautifully designed literary products, right? Starting with broadsides, hoping to move to chapbooks and shorter books. And we'll get there by steps. You know, my motto around here is, we're not hitting home runs, we're hitting a bunch of singles, right? We'll make incremental steps to move this project forward, and community sport's gonna be crucial to that. So thank you so much for coming. Reach out to me if you have any questions or wanna talk. Of course, I'll be here tonight. I hope you enjoy Peter Koch.
Okay, so now I will do a formal introduction. I realize that many of you here already know Peter and his work, but for those who do not, including those watching on MCAT, here is an overview to set the stage for his presentation. In 1974, Peter Koch founded Montana Gothic, a journal of poetry, literature, and graphics, Blackstone Press, and a letterpress printing office in Missoula. In 1978, he moved to San Francisco and embarked on a one-year apprenticeship with book designer Adrian Wilson at his renowned press in Tuscany Alley. From 1991 to 2011, Peter taught the hand-printed book in its historical context, a printing laboratory press and historical survey of the book as a work of art at Berkeley and the Bancroft Library. In 2005, he created the Codex Foundation to preserve and promote the arts of the book, and is currently the emeritus director of the Codex International Book Fair and Symposium. In 2018, he created Extraction, Art on the Edge of the Abyss, a movement that continues to sweep the world of artists and activists who are concerned about the destruction of the environment by irresponsible industrial extraction and pollution. Peter Koch's books and artwork have been the subject of solo exhibitions at the New York Public Library, the San Francisco Public Library, the Widener Library at Harvard, the Yellowstone Art Museum, the Montana Museum of Art and Culture, the Missoula Art Museum, the Paris Gibson Museum of Contemporary Art, Stanford University Library, the Book Club of California, and the Grolier Club. And I suspect there's many more that could have gone in that list. Since the dissolution of Blackstone Press in 1983, Peter has published under numerous imprints named to suit different facets of his work: Peter Koch Printers, Hormone Deranged Editions, Editions Koch, and most recently, the Real Lead Saloon. So please join me in welcoming Peter Rutledge Koch. Thank you.
Well, that was the subject of my talk, so now I'll have to come up with something else to say. Thank you, by the way, everybody here, especially, for people like Ashby and Kevin and Robert and David, and the list is long because, I'm trying as hard as I can to spread spread the word and also spread the responsibility of making this press a reality. I've dreamt of it for about 50 years and made a kind of a preliminary stab by starting in Missoula and 1974. And so I'm just, like I said, I'm very grateful for everyone who has joined us this evening, and to any listeners out there in the future. So my talk this evening will be largely autobiographical, which just went by quickly. And it grows from a deeply rooted conviction that through the study of the wondrous and beautiful books and artworks of the past, and through a prolonged and intimate hands-on exposure working with them, one may develop a vocation, and as in my case, printing on the hand press, as an antidote or still point in the media-mad and hyper-saturated world that we live in. I'm going to use the word craft a lot this evening, very short talk, but so I want to say something about the craft spelt with a capital C, and about work spelt with a capital C. A narrow view of craft and artisanal work in general clearly divides conceptual work from the work of the body and the work of the hand, haptic work, if you will. According to this view, the work of conceptual art and dematerializes the object and reduces art to its essential ideas, presented in minimal or even immaterial forms, while the artisan, the craftsman, materializes the vision. So one's going one way and the other's going the other. But in fact, I also include the craft of thinking and the craft of formation and design of concepts, as well as the writer's craft, the potter's, the woodworker's, and the printer's craft. This more enriched view of craft, with capital C, and of the book arts in particular, deserves a nomenclature of its own, which I refer to as high craft and high concept books, a sort of a third stream in the firmament of the book as a work of art. And another word about risk. I think that craft includes risk-taking. It's not only precision. Sometimes you're at stake in your craft. You can make mistakes. And the artist deliberately enters a realm of risk-taking, leaving behind the more pedestrian shopping mall of life in an attempt to grasp the very quick of their being and to express and give form to the impossible, unspeakable truth. The same holds true for printers at the Real Ed Saloon, we hope, anyway. So I am often asked why I became a printer. I mean, because people just, they just kind of, they're curious, like we all are. And the short answer is because I'm a bibliophile, a reader and a lover of books. Like anyone who enjoys a good meal and subsequently learns how to cook, as a printer, I made books to satisfy my personal, intellectual, and aesthetic appetites. And then where to begin, with this autobiography. I think that in general, I inherited a taste for exploration and travel. My whole mythology was based on Lewis and Clark having walked through this valley, and my grandfather writing about it, and my great-grandfather writing about it, and being handed books about Lewis and Clark when I was in grade school. And so I learned about exploration and travel. I also learned about von Humboldt, and I learned about Darwin, and I learned about Mackenzie, and a lot of great explorers. And with a childhood, it all really begins as an expedition into the unknown. My kind of character formation is about doing something entering a realm in which I'm not familiar, and then seeing out how much I can familiarize myself to it. With the child, it began really in grandfather's library on Beckwith Avenue, observing him as he wrote his books. And before that, really, following our family tree back to the early 17th century in Denmark, to discover that we were theologians, foresters, architects, ship's captains, editors, engineers, and scientists, a considerable number of whom were also authors, none of whose books I can read, because I was never taught Danish. As a child and later as a young man, I was fortunate enough to enjoy, through our family connections and friendships made at Paxson Grade School, the literary giants Leslie Fiedler and Norman Maclean. And throughout the 60s, this is beyond childhood, I traveled about in the literary bohemian quarters of Tangiers, Paris, New York City, San Francisco, Big Sur, always returning home to Missoula to resume my formal education in our own literary mecca here at home in Missoula. So in 1970, after completing a long, drawn-out liberal arts education, I was able to spend 10 years here as an undergraduate. I'll tell you in private how I managed that. And after a long, drawn-out education here at the university, first in the biological sciences and later majoring in the history of science and philosophy, and I was kind of good at logic, I applied for a position at the University of California's Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory and rented a tiny apartment above City Lights Publishing House in Telegraph Hill in San Francisco. I began working nights at the Berkeley Lab, digitizing proton collisions in the bubble chamber at the business end of a large Bevatron particle accelerator. And at the same time I was living in North Beach, I was continually running across people like Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Allen Ginsberg, and the rest of the City Lights mob, some of whom I had met previously in Tangiers in 1964. So in 1970, I'm reacquainting myself with a lot of these sort of wandering bohemian artists and writers that passed through Tangiers and Paris, where I was living for a year. Well, hanging out at the City Lights bookstore, I befriended a group of poets that surrounded the American surrealist Philip Lamantia. We spent evenings smoking. Lamantia worshipped tobacco, and theorizing and disparaging rival surrealist poseurs. The Marxist intellectuals around La Mantilla, however, turned out to be too thuggish for my taste, and I drifted away. Soon thereafter, I began to run with a band of independent poets and publishers with printing presses, like George Hitchcock of Kayak magazine fame, and the situationist poet and political radical Adam Cornford and his mentor, the Greek surrealist Nanos Valeritis. And it was around then that I met Vivale, the publisher of the now legendary San Francisco punk newspaper Search and Destroy, who introduced me to the obscure fiction at that time of J.G. Ballard, all of whom became key influences on my later work as a writer and publisher. So, several years into working as a grunt in big science, really big science, I finally accepted that my true calling was to follow I'm sorry, I lost myself because I was, there are more images. I was just thinking, where are they? My true following was to follow a literary path, and I left my scientist colleagues behind to fight the Cold War, and I returned to Missoula to raise a literary ruckus in Montana. Actually, this preamble is to say that I felt called to the art of printing by an inner predisposition. All right, I spent my life with these literary monsters and friends. And there I was, 30 years old, having just left my career-level job in California and lacking any clue at all about how to make a steady living. I decided to purchase a printing press. And I'd never seen one before. And it just seemed the right tool to pry open the door to high craft. And to say something even further more about the capital C in craft, after years of reading in the history of magic, experimental science, Eastern medieval philosophy, logic, I was prepared, at least, to be receptive to the archaic idea that the practice of a craft, with a capital C, can and should be perceived as a spiritual discipline, particularly when coupled with a philosophical bias of a more or less Neoplatonic nature, which I certainly had. It was from my readings in medieval and early Renaissance philosophy that I encountered the Gothic architects and the later humanists like Pico della Mirandola and Giordano Bruno, from whom I gleaned a reverence for the haptic realm. Their writings were infused with magic and the Hermetic tradition, in which craft, and crafts such as alchemy or painting, were really accepted as a fundamental path towards enlightenment, and in the form of a deeper understanding of nature. That goes pretty well with Missoula, doesn't it? You know, we got a lot of nature around here. The French writer and philosopher Paul Valret lamented the loss of slower and older forms of workmanship or craftsmanship this way, quote, "The patient process of nature was once imitated by men. Miniatures, ivory carvings elaborated to the point of greatest perfection, stones that are perfect in polish and engraving, lacquer work or paintings in which a series of thin, transparent layers are placed one atop the other. All of these products of sustained, sacrificing effort are vanishing, and the time is past in which time did not matter. Modern man no longer works at what cannot be abbreviated." Poor Paul. He didn't get to meet us. Well, there is a sign in my studio that said, wait, stop, there must be a harder way to do this. Printing, then, being the most literate and bookish craft of all, suited my every predisposition. And, after all, printers, who were once thought to be guardians of all the arts and the sciences, they could carry swords, and as a sign of nobility of their craft. And that really looked good to me. I mean, I never really had a sword, but I could create them by on my typewriter. So returning home in 1975, fresh back from 4 years in San Francisco, jobless, collecting unemployment, and being the proud owner of a printing press that I had no idea how to operate, the first thing I set myself to do was to publish Montana Gothic, an independent literary and graphic arts journal. I had a flyer printed at a quick print here in Missoula, And I went around town and put it up in bars and in bookstores, Garden City News, Eddie's Club, now Charlie B's, and I papered the university as well. I came over here thinking that maybe some of the university students would, in the writing department, would be interested. And drawing upon my so I started a literary magazine, and I start drawing upon my international friendships spread from Kathmandu to San Francisco. And I'd never been to Kathmandu, but there was this diaspora from Tangiers to Kathmandu. And I met all these guys in Tangiers in the early 60s. And then they moved to Kathmandu to start literary presses, of all things, using Nepalese handmade paper. And they were a crazy bunch of people. I began soliciting from all of my friends. And it was not going to be the usual Montana regional affair. After Big Sur, Paris, and Tangiers, I was ready for something different. Cowboy surrealism, experimental writing, critical manifestos, those were what constituted my literary taste at the time. There's a cartoonist among us who probably would recognize the name of the very famous French artist who made cowboy images, and I, of course, took the words out of the comic book and put my own words in his mouth. But and you'll notice, by the way, that the buckaroo has lost his hat and is carrying a martini down on the spine of the book. That was a later edition. So I acquired my first press in '74, and it was an 1899 Chandler and Price treadle-operated platen jobbing press that was for sale at the Ravalli County Republican newspaper in Hamilton, Montana. There it is. There it is 6 months ago in my former studio. That is treadle operated, so it operates, you step on it with your foot in rhythm, and it just keeps on moving, and you can print with your hands and treadle with your feet, and watch out for your fingers. After my first experiments in operating the press, I purchased the entire print shop attached to the Fairfield Times near Freeze Out Lake over there in Great Falls. I got the whole press for $300. And this is just the remnants of it. It was 2 truckloads, and here I am on Woody Street unloading one of the presses in 1975, I think, or 6. Anyway, there I am, young, naive, and ready to make trouble. I set out to acquire a hand press rather than an offset press simply because the elegant examples of the hand-printed book that I had encountered in San Francisco deeply impressed me with what I call their luminous and material beauty, luminosity and materiality. These exemplary books, like the windows of a Gothic cathedral, let the light in, a sort of materialia lumina, which was an expression that I learned when reading about the Abbot Suger, who was the designer of a Gothic cathedral in France. And I, of course, got that in my medieval philosophy class here in Missoula. Anyway, so my first book, under my newly fledged imprint, Blackstone Press, Blackstone symbolizing the most primitive state of matter undergoing alchemical transformation. And I was modest enough at that time to think that I didn't know anything, and therefore I could name myself the Blackstone Press and not presume to be the future grandiose character that you see before you today, what's left of him. The first book to appear was Born. I love that title. I couldn't help. A selection of unusually spare poems by Richard Hugo's student Michael Poge. After Born came Pomegranate, a small chapbook of erotic poems by Montana poet Jane Bailey, who had studied with Leslie Fiedler, and a short story, The Marvels of Professor Pettigrew, by the English Fluxus artist Opal L. Nations, accompanied with my magical apparatus-inspired collage drawings. Once I learned the typographic design and printing basics, I was in my element printing for the more bohemian, literary, and artistic community of Missoula back in the mid-'70s. Now, as an aside, to put this into context, I had been employed, in a national laboratory funded by basically the Department of Defense, and we were looking at the subatomic structure in hopes of discovering particles yet unknown. And we did discover some of them, or they did. But if I wanted to get a job in Missoula, and I did need to, I was able to get a really high-paying $6 an hour job at Rudy's News. And that was about the only thing I was qualified for, because there was no Lawrence Berkeley lab here for me to work in. $6 an hour. So I got myself this printing press that you saw back there, and suddenly I could charge $75 an hour for my work and get a workout at the same time. You know, I didn't have to join a gym or anything. I mean, I wore a sweatband, and and I would change feet. Anyway, so 4 years of doing this in Missoula for all of the really cool, hip, cool, fun people that I knew, which was just about everybody, because it is a small town, and as you know, and then being a townie, I knew more of them than most people that had come in from out of town to go to school here. Anyway, after 4 very successful and happy years in Missoula, I decided to return to San Francisco in '78 and pursue my own printing historical studies in the very hyper-enriched bibliosphere that permeates the San Francisco Bay Area. So in 1983, Shelley Hoyt, my partner, and I disbanded our Blackstone press. And to make my living, I proceeded on to establish Peter Koch printers. And then I made coasters, that I would get hand out to people. And I don't know if you can read that. You probably can't, but the sign on the left says Phillipsburg Iron Works. And I did nail that incredible cut at Phillipsburg one day. And then I snuck in my family name on the neighboring building that didn't have a name on it for myself. And I started calling myself Hormone Deranged Editions, Last Chance Gulch, because my dear friend Bill Borneman had a bookstore on Last Chance Gulch, Bedrock Books. And I thought, I wish I had an address on Last Chance Gulch. Jesus, I'm talking about poetry of place, And of course, my logo type, I could go back. It was, if you remember, the logo type on the top of Montana Gothic is a copper dragon crawling on a dome, which hangs over Last Chance Gulch in the Atlas Block building. And to me, that was the surrealism having come to Montana. This marvelousness, this dream undercurrent of terror, right? Salamander, fire, creatures of, mystery, gnomish, crazy stuff. It was crawling around on the building tops in Montana, but people weren't paying attention. So I thought, Montana Gothic, we'll bring them we'll bring them under the umbrella of cowboy surrealism. Anyway, I moved to San Francisco. My clients soon. So I opened a professional letterpress printing and book design studio. My clients were soon to include the greatest San Francisco Bay Area rare book libraries and private bibliophilic clubs and communities. I didn't know a soul in California that could pay me to run my printing press. So I had to go where the patronage was. And the only people who were sophisticated, I dare say, enough to be able to want to buy a very expensive, very intense, very labor-intensive, high hand-set type printed on handmade paper. Where are you going to find a client who wants that? Well, Stanford University libraries and the bibliophilic clubs, people who were book collectors, people who, had some money and cared about really great art. And I wormed my way in there, and it wasn't easy because there were 12 others ahead of me waiting for that very tiny little bit dribble of patronage, that they could have done a little better at had they tried, the patronage part. Anyway, so in the following 5-year period, I ceased publishing altogether and became fully engaged in the struggle to make a living as a designer, printer, and to raise a son and those things that one does in your 40s. But by moving to San Francisco, I found myself in a somewhat crowded field, as I said, and I really had to fight and struggle. But during that period, I became known as what they called a cutting-edge classicist. Now, that's an oxymoron, I know, but I thought it fit me perfectly. I thought that, Mr. Avant-Garde Cowboy Surrealist from Montana goes to San Francisco and learns how to print like an Italian in the 15th century, which is what I did. I went to San Francisco and I hung out with the rarest, finest, most beautiful books the world has ever seen. And in the San Francisco Public Library, you could just walk right in the door and ask for them, and they'd bring them out and put them on the table in front of you. And I looked at that stuff, and I went, oh my God, this is dreamboat stuff. So, and then it turned out that my clients, future clients, had already seen those books and actually already owned them in their own private libraries. And, you know, so I fell right in with them, and I studied with, you know, these two of the greatest living book designers of the time, Jack Stoffaker and Adrian Wilson, and off I went. But then things eventually changed. 5 years of struggle to make a living, and suddenly I was able to make a small living. Well, I was always able to make a small living because I didn't have a trust fund. Well, I did sort of, but I spent all of it being bad. Anyway, the fragments of hair. So I really things really eventually changed, and I began to publish again. And so the first thing that I took on to publish on my own was the Fragments of Heraclitus. So following this is, of course, and the Point Lobos poems of Robinson Jeffers, accompanied by photographs by the brilliant German photographer Wolf Vandenbusche, who had become my friend. So in 1994, I found myself talking to a librarian at the New York Public Library, which is one of the greatest libraries on our continent. And I said, what's happening? What's going on, you know, in the rare book world and the book arts world? And this librarian said, well, you know, Peter, when people come in and ask what's going on in this country, we show them your work. Wow, you can imagine. I was taken back. I didn't even know. I've never dreamt of such a thing. Well, I knew they owned my work because there was a librarian there who was buying anything I would offer him. But, you know, I didn't know that they actually showed it. I thought what they did is they packed it up in boxes, you know, and put it in the basement and waited for a cataloger for 30 years to come and open the box and then catalog it and then hide it back in a vault somewhere 30 more years until I'm long dead and someone decides they want to find out who the hell he was, and they drag it out of the archives. No, they're showing this work. And I said, well, you know, I've never had an exhibition in my life, ever. She said, well, what about us? I said, oh, you got to be kidding. Sure, why not? So I mean, New York Public Library, you know, between the lions on Fifth Avenue, I mean, the greatest venue in all the Americas, well, up there with Library of Congress, National Library of Brazil, National Library of Argentina. And at the same time, the librarian at New York Public said, well, I don't want to do this all alone. Why don't we call up the San Francisco Public Library and see if they'll join us in this adventure? And simultaneous exhibitions of two of the greatest libraries in the nation. And I had the whole room. I had a room, you know, like this, big, full, everything I'd ever done almost. And then all of a sudden I get a phone call from these people at Harvard. You know, this is all a year before. I said, well, what about us? You know, and I said, okay. So, you know, a tiny little exhibition went into the rotunda at Harvard at the same time. So I spent the year of 1994 preparing for this, dropped my business, went into enormous amount of credit card debt, because anytime anybody came to me and said, would you print something for me? I said, I haven't got time, you know, because I had to finish my books for this exhibition that was coming up that I couldn't miss, and my life depended on it. Oh, anyway, suddenly, I could trace my trajectory from the Missoula Public Library's children's book room in the basement of the old Missoula Carnegie Library on Patty Street to Between the Lions on Fifth Avenue in New York City to Harvard Square, San Francisco Civic Center. What a journey! Wow, you know, and there were many, many more to come. Most spectacularly, my nearly 50-year retrospectives hosted by Stanford University, and 2 years later in the New York City at Grolier Club's Elegant Exhibition Hall in 2021. Now, that's it. I mean, it's over for me. I can retire. I more than hit the ringer. I mean, but I want to come here and spend more time. That's what I want to do. So in the years just previous to my retrospectives in New York and at Stanford University, where they have really good collections of my work, I spent working on this 3-volume catalog. And so the first volume, 1, is a bibliography written by, you know, a very expert bibliographer at UCLA of all of the 212 books that I've made in my life. Printed. I didn't design all of them, but I only wrote a few of them. Hard Words, which is volume 2, which is about my Montana suite, I call it, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. And then volume 3 is called Against Design, and that was made to offend designers and get them into conversation, because I never went to design school. I never took a class in design. I read design books, of course, and I thought they were more or less worthless. And yet I'm told that I'm one of the best designers out there. And I've won huge national awards, the very top awards. But I've never entered a competition. People have found the work, liked it, the designer type, right? They look at my work and they like it. But of course, I'm not one of them. I mean, I'm not a member of the fraternity or the club or anything. So I titled it Against Design. But inside that volume is lots and lots of pictures of the thousands of pieces that I have designed and printed. And literally thousands. I mean, 200 and some books, but I don't know how many thousands of announcements, posters, broadsides, pamphlets. I mean, I just was working like a devil. When you open your own business, you've just started the worst business in the world. You are now busy 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It never goes away. You sleep, you wake up at night worried about it. You wake up in the morning and rush off to work. And you'll do a little eating and have a little fun in between. But it's work. Well, anyway. That's the title page. I wanted of the catalog. I wanted to show that because I just love those two words, embodied language. So I decided I could, in the form of a book. So the embodiment of language, that's what I've been doing. So my exhibitions, by the way, in Montana have been a really great source of pleasure for me. The memorable events at the Missoula Art Museum, they were listed already. Paris, Gibson, Holter, etc. And now even one piece hanging at the super new Missoula MMAC Museum. We'll see if they get to reopen soon, we hope. We were just closed down yesterday while I was there by the city planners. They'll reopen. Anyway, I want to just go a little bit further and talk about the Codex Foundation for a second. After I had exhibited at the legendary, it's not even legendary, the greatest book fair in the world, the Frankfurt Book Fair, been there since medieval times. It takes up about 5 city blocks in space, and it's up for almost a month in Frankfurt, as well as the fine press fairs in Oxford, Melbourne, and Mexico City. 2 of those I organized myself. In 2005, I was determined to create the biennial Codex International Book Fair and Symposium. And what that meant is that, like starting Montana Gothic, I went to my 200 best friends, printers in Paris and London and New York and Iowa City and Vancouver, British Columbia, and so forth, and just said, come on, everybody, let's have a party. Come, and I'll get the buyers. I know where they are, And so they came, and this is the first one. I mean, number 1. This is in the Student Union building at Cal, and there were we thought we'd like to try and get 60 exhibitors, and we got 80 exhibitors from 14 countries. Now, I don't know if I actually have a picture for you. Okay, so now this is more recent. Different auditorium. That's 25,000 square feet on the floor. Okay, and their place is crowded. We went from 80 exhibitors to now we have 220, and we're throwing people out. More people want in than we were let in, and because we have to keep it within reason, we really do. And we wanted the idea is that we're maintaining the highest bar conceivable. So there's a lot of people that come to us and want to exhibit who just don't make it over the bar, and if they do make it over the bar, we do everything we can to bring them in, and. But we also have people who are not over the bar in the sense that we encourage organizations and colleges and book arts programs to take a table at Codex, send the students, and we have little subsidies available for that when it happens. We usually have 4 or 5 not-for-profits that are coming and getting acquainted with the world. And to tell you what you meet there is you meet 50 of the top 200 curators that buy books in rare book libraries around the world. You meet 50 of them. They're there. You know, they may not stop at your table, you know, but if they do, it might be like, you know, like Christmas. But also there are the private bibliophiles, the people that buy books for their own private collections. And then there are the people who are being introduced to the book arts and get enthusiastic and start little collections. And you can buy books at the Codex Book Fair that range in price from $25 to $25,000. You know, whatever your budget is. You know, I mean, 25,000 is probably a low estimate. I know I saw one there for 100, but only one. So this is a year ago or two. Excuse me, I have a pain problem comes on. A year ago, my landlord said he wanted to double my rent, and I was the host of the Codex Foundation in my private studio, and I couldn't afford it. And at the last Codex, I complained to this fellow. He came and sat down next to me, and he said, "What's going on, Peter?" And I said, "Oh God, they're throwing me out. I have to leave my building. I don't know what I'm going to do with Codex. I'm going to give some presses away. I'm going to send them up some to Montana, and I'm going to sell some stuff." And he said, "Well, I'll help you." And I knew that he had enormously deep pockets. And I said, "Oh," but I didn't say, "Oh," I didn't say, "What are you going to do?" And he kind of finished the sentence, said, "Maybe I'll buy you a building." Ta-da! He bought us this building. That represents, a considerable sum of money in downtown Berkeley. There are 2 stories. On the left, on the left is our flexible space where we do bookbinding and have parties and small groups of people meeting and showing their work to each other. On the right-hand side, where you can see that 19th century printing press that I bought in Hamilton, Montana. And then the upper stories are publishing offices up high, and then over there is my library. And so I have I call it my library. It's really the Codex library, but they're going to have to wait until I'm dead, until they own it. I'm not giving it to them yet. That's called the Logan Book Art Center. For those of you who know the name Reva and David Logan, you see it on National Public Television all the time. Their son gave us the money for this building, and he was a friend of mine, so that's why they were able to do that. So now, we will soon be hosting, as I said, our 9th Biennale in February, and as a measure of our success, we have 20-plus countries, 200 exhibitors in 25,000 square feet of exhibition space, and it's a hell of a party. So please make your plans to come and see it, okay? It's in February 2nd or 3rd or something like that. And, anyway, I wanted to say a word about humanism, as it was on the poster. My historical roots and inspiration as a printer and publisher stem directly from the workshops of the great scholar printer Aldus Manutius. His 4-volume Aristotle, printed in the first Greek typeface, which he had cut, is a landmark in printing history. He followed Aristotle with Aristophanes, Homer, Catullus, and Virgil, to name just a few of the books he published. In 1499, he published the first edition of the pagan erotic book titled, it's a mouthful, the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, which means strife in a dream by Polyphilus. And it still remains one of the most beautiful books ever printed. It was printed in 1499. If you come to San Francisco, there's at least 5 copies of it available. I can show some to you. I even own one, but not the first edition. But I just saw one for sale, and if anybody wants to hand me a quick $160K, I'm going to bid on it. My own watermark by Joseph Brodsky is an homage to this great printer, Aldus Manutius. Following in the footsteps of Aldus, who collaborated with the greatest humanist Greek scholars of his day, between 1990 and 2003, I printed the pre-Socratic philosophers Heraclitus and Parmenides, who were high on my personal list of ancient philosopher poets that needed both typographic reinterpretation and new translation. Now, for those of you who haven't studied the history of the book and the history of the development of the visual language and the history of the development of typography, just know that each generation almost has treated the book as an art form in its way, and you can really almost date them. You can look at a book printed in 1779 in London and say, if you're sophisticated enough to have had their hands full of them, I haven't, but there are people that do. They just say, oh yeah, London, 1799. You can tell because that typeface came from Haarlem in the Netherlands, and it came over in 1788, and then they started using it, and it became really popular in London. That's the kind of knowledge they know. There are 7 levels of typographic knowledge that I've identified, and I won't bore you with them, but they're there. So following in the footsteps, I wanted to reinterpret typographically the great classics of Parmenides and Heraclitus. And I got to work directly with the poet translators Guy Davenport and Robert Bringhurst, and I walked, and by working with them, I walked carefully and gingerly, not too gingerly, in the footsteps of the great humanist printers that I had so long admired. What you have to know is that Aldous, he wasn't just like a printer guy. He was hanging out with the greatest philosopher scholars alive in Europe at the time. They came to his shop to get work, to get paid, proofreading the books that he in Greek and in Hebrew and in Latin, and it was an interesting world, a little different than what we do today in most presses. Anyway, my more immediate printing mentors were the San Francisco designer printer Adrian Wilson and Jack Stoffaker, and the poet printer William Everson. Each of the 3 were of differing philosophical persuasions. Adrian, who played the jazz clarinet, was clearly an Epicurean. Jack, who published exquisite editions of Plato, Horace, and Cicero, was a classicist, and most certainly a Stoic. While Bill Everson, poet-printer, was an ecstatic Catholic mystic who disrobed in order to get married from his lay position as a monk, lay priest. All 3 of them, by the way, were pacifists. Two of them met in a concentration. The camps that you went to when you're a conscientious objector camp. They met, and they were taught how to print by William Everson, whose dad was a printer in Salinas, California. And he taught my other teacher, my first real super mentor, Adrian, he taught Adrian how to print at that camp in 1943. Anyway, so I was saying this is a little bit about my influence. It's just another word. 2 artists of my own generation, meaning my age, Anselm Kiefer and Sebastião Salgado, both of whom were profoundly affected by the wars of their times and our times, and the environmental destruction that they witnessed, have earned my respect and have had a great influence on my work. Now, what I wanted to say, just something now about the future. Nowadays, as AI technology advances and we merge more and more intimately with our electronic devices, the more convinced I become that the practice of a haptic art or craft will provide us with a few moments of relief from our ever-increasing appetite for streaming electronic images and information, while allowing us some time to take a deeper look into and connect a little more closely with the better parts of our own human nature. Kiowa novelist N. Scott Momaday spoke of it this way, quote, "We have our best existence within the element of language, and the book, as a concentration of that element, a whole realization of our experience in the world of ideas, and as such, it is a thing of infinite possibility." By approaching, this is end of Kiowa novelist, by approaching the handcrafts as both a physical and spiritual practice, a fine example being the meticulous hand setting of metal type, carefully spacing the letters and printing on a sheet of dampened handmade paper with the weight and leverage of a steel and cast iron hand press, we open the door to a renewed connection with our language. The renowned poet William Everson offered these thoughts on the practice of printing in 1949. Quote, "As a creative man, the richest thing I can do is to write a poem, and the next is to print it. The one flows from the other, gives it tangibility, a further dimension. On the page, a poem achieves its final form, and it goes out to take its place, if it is worth it, in the consciousness of men." Following then, the hand press, this is him still, follows then the hand press, because it is capable of measuring up to all the idealism that a man can bring to it, because the human hand is evidenced in it, and because its tradition holds within it the finest achievements of the bookman's craft. Referring perhaps to the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, which was printed by hand on a wooden press in Venice in 1499. And I add, what could be more human than using our hands to write, carve, paint, and print? Norman MacLean said as much about his 8.5-foot bamboo fly rod, about how mankind is a damned mess, I think was the quote. But a fly rod can measure up, he didn't say this, but I'm saying it, but a fly rod can measure up to all the skill and idealism that one can bring to it. Today, here in Missoula, my desire is to aid in building a program of printing and book art studies at the university. A fledgling interdisciplinary program is already being tested in collaboration with the creative writing department, the graduate studies department, the forestry school, the arts department, the Mansfield library, etc., hopefully inspiring a group of robust book arts community here in Missoula. So here you have our happy printer named Ashby, taking his first print on a hand press. This is the kind of joy that people get when they turn the crank for the first time. There's the instructor. Professors Robert Stubblefield, Ashby Kench, aided by David Axelrod, have laid the groundwork. Generous friends of the press like Kevin Head, who is here this evening. I'm looking around. There's someone we're missing. I won't name her yet. Have contributed enormously to bringing my old Hacker test press up to its new home next door in the Schreiber Gym building, along with printing types and furniture enough to outfit a small but refined bibliographic and book arts press. This is the picture of the press carved in wood by a friend of mine. I said, I need a wood engraving of that Hacker test press for my catalog. It's the frontispiece of one of my catalogs. And he had printed on it. I taught him how to print on that press. And he's gone on to now become one of the most celebrated wood engraving artists and bookmakers on earth, as good as they get. And he gets a little start in my press because I say, yeah, come on over. I want to work with you because you're so cool. And that's the kind of the way printers work, not all of them, but most of them. So books. What I'd like to concentrate now on with a few minutes more, or hold your attention, please, if you bear with me, would be some books and themes, several of which are on display here upstairs, that originate from here in Missoula and now culminate in my magnum opus, the Speculum Mundi. So here comes the slideshow, finally. So now I don't have a script. So I'll just tell you that when I bought my equipment, I inherited things like, that's called an electrotype engraving that was used to print a newspaper in Freezeout, Montana. And that happens to be Mr. and Mrs. N.J. Landwick, who lived in Freezeout sometime in the early part of the 20th century. I don't know them, but their names are written on the back of the block. And I started using them because they are so cool. It's so hard. They are so hard. They work so hard. And so I started my Montana suite with 4-letter words. And I made a suite of 11 or 12 prints on 4-letter words. Hard, lost, shot, gone. Oops, 5 letters. Broke. Froze. Yeah, well, I started with 4-letter words, but then there were some I couldn't pass up. And then I moved on into this happened in about the year 2000. That was when desktop scanners became available. So here I am using these 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th century technologies, but I have a desktop scanner and I can turn my wood type and my printing block over on the desktop scanner, scan it, and then blow it up till it's that big in exhibition size, and it's toured the museums in Montana. So I'm merging these two technologies, in some pretty nutso ways, but I did it. The theme that soon developed after I had to finish my hard words, I called them, was this. It was based on this engraving. This is a kind of thing that went on stock certificates, selling railroad properties and farms, to the settlers that we now, call out every chance we get. Oh, those damn settlers. Well, so it went. You know, we all settled here at one time or another, some prehistorically and some last year. But that particular image is so striking, isn't it? It's so powerful. I mean, you know, you have the railroad, you have the farmer cutting down all the trees. Notice all the tree stumps. You know, the rivers, the Golden Gate Bridge into San Francisco, you know, and so forth and so on. So I decided I would make a portfolio of two-syllable words. And so, as some wag said to me, "Oh, you've entered your Baroque period, zeitgeist." So that is a hand-colored version of a stock certificate for the Oregon and Transcontinental Railroad Company. And you can see, you know, anyway, so this is a lead type and freeze out. Okay, so I've been to Freeze Out, Montana, and I bought some printing equipment. And this is a picture of the surrender camp of a Sioux Indian on the Yellowstone River. Kind of sad thing that it is. And so producing this portfolio of images, you know, once again, using the libraries and photo collections at the Montana Historical Society, and then using lead type from my drawers. And then I made this portfolio. I made a huge exhibition size. All the pieces were about half that size. And it was commissioned by the Holter Art Museum to celebrate, or at least to deal with the Lewis and Clark expedition's bicentennial. And the guy who ran the museum at the time said, I'm being pestered by all these people who want to use my museum for buckskin reenactments, you know, during the bicentennial. And he said, that's not what we're here for. I want some art. And I said, well, I know a little bit about Lewis and Clark. Maybe I'll make something for you. So he allowed me to do this. So this led to an exhibition here in Missoula, at the Missoula Art Museum. And in the next room, while I was having an exhibition on that exhibition we just went through, I encountered the work of Deborah Magpie Erling on the wall as a piece of a poem that was on the wall to introduce an exhibition of the works of Native American responses to the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And of course there was lots and lots of irony, you know, tons of irony. And I loved that exhibition. And I stopped and read that wall piece, and my wife and I had just, Susan, my wife, my second wife, we had just finished reading Deborah's novel and in Berkeley, and you know, just loved it. And there she was on the wall, and we exclaimed how much we loved it. And Laura Millen, the director of the Art Museum, was giving me the tour, and she said, would you like to meet Deborah? And I said, well, yeah. And so we were shopping with her 2 days later at the Whole Foods or the Best Foods or whatever it's called. And she said, oh, you want to meet Deborah? There she is. She's pushing a shopping cart, you know, our way. And I stopped and I said, oh God, I admire your work so much. And she said, oh God, I admire your work so much, because she had just seen the show next door to the other show. And she said, I keep the catalog of your exhibition on my writing desk. It you know, it says, I can feel the dead living in that exhibition. And so I said, oh, please, let's work together. Please, 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 please. And so we started talking about her writing more of these fragments of Sacajawea. So I wanted to make the book as an object that somehow echoed or was part of what I call a deep reading, or what you call a vertical tasting in the wine world. So I went back to Lewis and Clark's journals, and this happens to be Clark's field journal, right? Buckskin. You know, this is what he had stuffed in his tunic as he was walking, riding, or whatever he was doing. And he came home at night and wrote those elegant, beautiful journals that you see at the Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. But anyway, that's what it looked like. So I decided I would make a Sacagawea's journal, or something that I imagined that she might have recognized as something. Oh, who knows? Anyway, so I commissioned from a hand paper maker a piece of paper. I said, I want a piece of paper that looks and smells like buffalo rawhide. And she said, oh, God. A year later, she said, I made a huge mistake on a job, and I think I made exactly what you want. And she showed me this piece of paper that is like this. Oh my God, I just fell in love with it. So in the process of binding this book, we decided we'd bead the spine and add some cartridges. Why not? So we went down to the local shootery and, blasted away with a 38 and collected all our little brass casings, and then we drilled holes in them and, tied them onto the spine. And all because Deborah had said to me once when she saw me messing around with these cartridges, she said, that reminds me of a necklace I own, which she does, and it has a cartridge hanging from it. So this is what a spread of the book looks like. So, over a period of a couple of years, we collaborated. She sent me poems, not poems, she sent me fractured prose, fragmented prose. She says, I am not a poet, I respect her. However, she's not here to cut me down for this. One of the greatest poets I know on earth, Adam Cornford. The guy, he teaches Blake, he teaches Shakespeare. The name, if you knew Cornford, you would say, oh, the literary elite of the world. Francis Cornford, generations. He's a Darwin and a Cornford. And he is, educated as well as you can be. He stood at my wall and read these poems as I had them pinned up, and he had never seen them before, didn't know who she was. He stopped for an hour and read through this and said, those are the finest poems I've ever read in my life. The finest poems. So I said, Deborah, wait, you got to hear what Adam said. She says, I'm not a poet. Okay, all right, whatever you say. So we made these images we had to create a process at Magnolia Editions where we printed the images, inkjet print, on a giant flatbed press, which I'll show you in a minute. But I wanted the pages to be translucent, transparent, and I also wanted it to feel like parchment, like animal skin. So we printed it on a kozo paper made in Japan, which is really long fiber and is really porous and really absorbent. And then we let it cure for a couple of weeks, and then we coated it in clear acrylic. There's a kind of a close-up of some of the detail of the binding. And then we hand-sewed them and offered them to the world. And, I wasn't used to this much success. It sold out right away. And, went from, forgive me if I talk money, but I think it's important for young people to know this, is that I started selling that book for $3,500 a copy because of the amount of money work that went into it. I just sold a copy for $15,000, okay? The last copy, of course. But the thing is that these things become valuable if they become valuable. So now we're at a new state. This is what we just finished last month. So this is the handmade paper, and this is the Sacajawea fragments that were part of the state of the writings of the Sacajawea novel that you see today, Deborah's novel, The Lost Journals of Sacajawea. And this is, and you can see, I think, the quality of the paper a little bit here on the raking light, and that the type, bites down through the page, leaves a mark. Death is to be taken from the place that homes us. Powerful stuff. And we had set this over a period of 6 months on Saturdays at the Real Lead Saloon. And then we beaded some, all of them actually. Some have cartridges, some don't. And those guinea fowl feathers we bought at a fly tying shop here in Missoula last summer. Keep Montana in the picture. And there we are in a beading session at with our friends, making up our little danglers, as we call them. And, we had to learn, well, we didn't really have to learn how. I had to learn how to. They knew how to do it. And then, so there are 75 of these copies of this book in existence now, chapbook, and they all, each one has a different kind of dangler on it. Now I want to move to the second to last part. This is the depictions of Diogenes, and this printed on a lead tablet. There are 11 lead tablets, and they were handwritten out and then made into a metal die, which I actually hand-fed through a printing press. So this is pieces of lead that went through a printing press, and these are the sayings that were told of Diogenes the Cynic, a real badass philosopher a long time ago. He's kind of a performance artist philosopher. For those of you who can't read it, Diogenes, a rich man took Diogenes into his house and warned him not to spit on the rugs or expensive furnishings, whereupon he spat in the man's face, saying that he could find nothing else cheap enough to spit on. And the man is reputed to have been Plato, one philosopher after another. Okay, so I started making this book after visiting an exhibition of, by accident, of Anselm Kiefer, Sebastião Salgado, and Joseph Beuys in Germany. I'm in Frankfurt, Germany, and I'm being bored out of my gourd by the modern art down in the basement of this major Stedelijk art museum. And I'm gonna scream. I'm gonna run screaming from the room. And I turned a corner accidentally and came into this tiny little chamber that was big enough to house one painting that size on one wall, of 2 photographs on that wall, and there's that's it. And then a charred corpse, like sculpture made of cast iron, I think, on the floor that looked like it had just been burnt up in an airplane crash. And it turns out that's the life history of these 3 artists. Beuys had crashed and had been taken prisoner in World War II. He was kind of the father of Anselm Kiefer, spiritual father. Anselm Kiefer worked on lead sheets that he got from the roof of a destroyed cathedral that was bombed in Dresden. And Salgado worked with photography. And so, I don't know, I just had an epiphany in that room. I just said, oh, thank God, I've entered the darkness again. Whew. This a pile of dirt with a mirror in it just wasn't working for me. So I decided, I was really struck, and I went running upstairs to the bookstore and bought myself a notebook and started scribbling in it, and I'm still scribbling in it, because it's a 700-page thick notebook. But I started getting ideas for making a book of lead. A lead book, about mining in Montana, made of what was mined. So the ingredients of this book are copper, lead, silver, gold, and oil. That's the ingredients. Oil, I just said, no paper. Copper, lead, gold, silver, solder, and oil. So oil made the paper. I'm using a synthetic paper. So pictures, images of Butte Hill, and we take these flat pieces of lead that weigh 8 or so pounds a piece, and we lay them on this flatbed printer in the most high-tech artist studio I know of, Magnolia Editions in Oakland, California. And for those who don't know Magnolia, you'll have heard of the people who've been supporting him. Chuck Close, he worked with Chuck Close hand in glove for 20 years. People like Kiki Smith, other names like that, on and on. Anyway, Don and I have been friends for almost 50 years. So they're printing the lead sheets in that picture. The thing comes across it and prints it. Then we take the lead sheets and we overpaint them with a clear acrylic that's been mixed with bone black. So there's like human bones. This is what's like the mine. What's down in that mine? There are human bones, there's gold, there's silver, there's copper, there's all kinds of stuff. And we overprinted it like the smoke that was in the atmosphere of the town of Butte at the time that this happens to be Great Falls, those of you who know the Great Falls smelter. And then the binding is being done by my assistant Jonathan, and he's doing it by not welding but soldering the bits together. So we've got a copper rod for a spine with soldered on with silver solder, and then after all the sheets have got their spines, sort of soldered to them, each sheet one spine. Then we start experimenting with structures that we can knit these sheets together. And that took months of experiments. And the final experiment that really worked was the one that says the city is a blackened pit. And we finally came up with this structure, and Jonathan starts weaving. So just to try to imagine what we're doing, it's like a bicycle chain at the spine. But it's woven like your fabric belt, weaving one sheet of lead to the next with interlaying layers of this oil-based paper on which we printed these marvelous poems by Adam Cornford about the Butte mines and so forth. And so this is part of the process of weaving the lead sheets together, and then there's a box that we put it in, this kind of crypt. Made of copper with some gold embossing on it, patented copper. These are test pieces. And then the upper right is the bound final book. And there's the Christopher Steinauer, who's adding the gold to that one letter on the cover. And there it is in its box. And there is a copy here at the university you can handle, I think, if you're careful, but only under the guidance of the local librarian. So the pages look like this. On one side, you've got printed silver print poems about trolley cars have to creep, workers lose their way, people bleed from their noses, some vomit in the streets. This is from a newspaper article about Butte when they hadn't moved the smelter yet to Anaconda, and they were just smelting, heap roasting in the streets, and people were dying. Well, they weren't dying, they were just getting sick. And then we sewed these sheets together and created the book. Now, I want to get on to the final piece that I want to talk about. This is a long story, and I'll try to make it very short so that you can go home and get some dinner. I was in the philosophy school here. I was very frustrated one day, and I couldn't finish a paper on the a critique of technology. So unable to finish a paper or even begin it, I just thought, well, maybe I'll warm up a little, and I just typed a word full of words, a whole page full, and I left it in my typewriter. And I went down to Eddie's Club and drank until 2 a.m. and then went to the Stockman's and had a hamburger at closing time. And I came home, and someone had walked into during that time, someone had walked into my shack on Kiwanis Park and pulled it out of the typewriter, laid their hand over it, and drew an outline of their hand in red ink, or red pencil, or red ink, I guess it must have been, and it left no other sign. I came in, and it was no longer in my typewriter, it was lying there, and I went, the critique of technology, that's it, aha! So I handed it in and was immediately thrown out of school. I was told by my Herr Professor Albert Borgman, and he was right, that I was in the wrong department. I was in graduate school in philosophy, and I really should have been in the art department. So that haunted me for many years. That was in 1970 that I entered graduate school. So in 1982, I was invited to curate an exhibition at the World Print Center, and I said, I want as a subject matter typographic printmaking. And they said, what's that? And I said, well, I'll show you. And I made a big print. This print is so by so. The image area is only so by so. And I just took those words from that, and I made some images, and I called it Captured in Words. Well, those lay around in my studio for 10 years and gestated in the back of my mind. And it occurred to me years later that I should make a book. So I started making the sacred book, the metaphor of the book, the image of a book, not the book, the image of a book. So this is a vellum bound with alum Todd pigskin and bone clasp beads. And the text is the sacred word in a sacred typeface. Gaudi Bible. Actually, it's not Bible type, but it is close to it. And I made, I think, 25 copies of this book. And amazingly, people who loved incunabula, that is books printed in the first 50 years of printing, they loved it. They wanted to show it to their students while they're showing them an Aldus Manutius and something by Nicholas Jensen or Erhard Ratdolt or Johann Gutenberg, right? So this is the sacred book. Well, at the same time, I imagined it as a 3-volume work. The second volume was to be illustrated, and the third volume was not. So I was able to complete the first and third volume, and the second volume thwarted me for 25 years. And I finally, 5 years ago, 20 years it thwarted me, 5 years ago, I had another revelation, and I decided that I would replace the text, the meaningless text, the image of the text, the text as I called it, I would replace it with a real text. But I didn't want to hamper anybody by having to read the book. I wanted them to look at the book, and then, if they felt like it, Really felt like it. Read it. So I decided to print the book of Genesis in Jerome's Latin, unexpurgated, word for word if I could. And then I wanted to constellate that book with 5 more texts. So my model was a book called the Complutensian Polyglot Bible, printed a long time ago, in which the Bible was printed page for page or verse by verse, Hebrew, Latin, Syriac, Chaldaic. What's the 5th? I said Greek, didn't I? Hebrew, Latin, Chaldaic, Syriac. Okay, so they had Jerome's Latin in that very famous book. So I decided, so now we have all 3 volumes. We'll get to so volume 1 is down there. Volume 2 I'm going to tell you about now. Volume 3 I'll tell you about afterwards, and then we'll be done. But volume 2 is just illustrated, and that's the cover. And the cover looks like a waste sheet. That's the idea. This is a sheet of paper that was thrown out by the printers, but printing is really valuable, and so you don't throw out a sheet of paper. And so they did in the 15th, 16th century bind a lot of books in vellum. So we're going to enter the book now. It's a real quick trip. The book is really long. It's the history of the cosmos, the entire world, from the point of view of a boy born on Beckwith Avenue in 1943. So I've seen the world now, at least up to today, and it's very biased. It's my world, not yours, but we share most of it. So you enter, the first 16 pages of the book are dead black sheets. And then finally you enter the cosmos. And you go through 16 pages of Cellarius's atlas, which is the first great atlas of the heavens ever made. And after 16 pages of Cellarius, then we get to page 1 of my book, the Complutensian Polyglot Bible, married to the Nuremberg Chronicle and to word sorts. So just briefly, to make it easy to think about, okay, there's an image, what I call the core image. Right beneath the image is in principio creavit Deus caelum terram. That's Jerome's Latin, I'm told. I don't read a word of it. To the right, left, is the Hebrew first verse, and to the right, over there is the first verse in Greek. And then what you have beneath the core text is the biological effects of nuclear weapons. This is another text that runs throughout. So the book of Genesis runs throughout the entire book under images. Also at the bottom of every page is the biological effects of nuclear weapons, directly quoted from the United States government document published for our education. And then on the outer edges, the marginalia or scolia, that's where I get to talk and say anything I want. Like I get to pretend that I'm a scholar and I'm annotating this book. So it's printed on handmade paper, made in Italy about 1970. The mill is now collapsed, but I own a huge stash of their paper. There it is, printed. There's a little bit of the Hebrew. It starts with darkness, right? And then the light. And then we move gently through 35 double-page spreads. I'm not going to show but 2 or 3. So that's, in creavit Deus, and then the Hebrew, the biological effects. Then after a few pages, we get to the Ark of Noah and the Ark of Destruction. That's the hydrogen bomb, the one they dropped on Nagasaki. That's a big boy. Now, but both of those arks were meant to save the human race, right? One from the flood and the other from war. Well, we'll see about that. And then there's the dueling cosmologies, Earth-centric, way over there in the corner. That's what I did for a living, in the nuclear science. Now, here's something that should be familiar to you. Another double-page spread. Well, if you dig a pit, you get a skyscraper. So on the left, you have the Berkeley pit, and on the right, you have the tower. And you'll see it says Ecclesiastes. So I quote some Ecclesiastes, and then I write about it. And then the next page after following that is another version of hell. That's the Botticelli's design for Dante's Inferno. And we're moving rapidly through the history of the universe. We started with creation, with nothing. We started with before creation, and now we are all the way up to Eniwetok. And this magnificent explosion where we did, that's a hydrogen bomb. It's not even an atom bomb. And these are the names of all the companies that built it and are still building them. Caterpillar, Chernobyl Nuclear, China Lake Naval, Chukwi Mine, all the people, the Colts manufacturer, all the companies that support the making of this. And then I wrote some what I call chaos poetry. And way up in the corner, of plutonium mutation in the body, levels increase, on the surfaces, lateral, in a wolf, dispersion, in a zebra, the whole catastrophe. On the right, that is just, that's just the table of contents from a book on nuclear weapons. And on the left is. And then on the right, I just edited it with my own words. So if it's in italic, I added it, but I added it in a way that you could kind of dance between them if you wish, or read it vertically, and I call it chaos poetry. This is a nuclear effects disaster computer that I own. You can buy one if you want on the internet. And then I wanted to say I had to end this book, and it was really difficult after looking at all those pictures of disaster, one after another. So I thought I would end it on an enigma rather than a sour note. So you tell me, who's winning? I don't know. Portland or Yellowstone? Maybe both. So that's the last word in the book. There it is. So this is a collage that I made at Magnolia Editions from two photographs. One, the bison herd in Yellowstone, from 1906, and then contemporary Portland. And the final page is words being canceled. We have a new culture now. We're told that there are alternate truths and truths, right? And alternate facts. So, okay, well, that makes things a little difficult to understand, doesn't it? Alternate facts, really? Okay. So I end it, that you don't see it, but over in the corner, in 2020, we had just heard about this mysterious virus in China on its way, and some people were quaking in their boots. I wasn't yet. And I was writing those words, and Trump speak was really kind of everywhere on the wonderful media that he's on the front page every day. So we knew what he was saying, and so I kind of said a couple of things about that, and the book is over. And then when we go out into the microcosm. So then there's 16 pages of particle collisions as we go further, and then 16 pages of darkness, nothing, black pages. That's the end of that book. It's over there. Final book. Volume 3, I call it the last word, the final word. Okay, so when between the words there's no room for any thought or any pressure or any poetry or any action or anything, when we're finally totally fucking constrained by the world that we have built, then you get a book like that. That's called the Full Metal Jacket. And the text block in the center says words, 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 and I banged it out on a typewriter. Except in this case, it was actually lead type cast by a foundry to look like typewriter type. It was called Remington Bold. And I printed a whole book full of them. I think there's something like 174,000 words in this book. Every last word. And that's from the page. And that's all it is, the whole book from one end to the other. $5,000. I sold them all. I love it. Anyway, that's what I call the Urtext trilogy, and I just want to show you that I am human, and this is my study, and where I sit and work, and this is the end of my talk. This is the newest piece. This is Deborah Magpie Erling's Fragments of Sacajawea, and there's one over here I'll be happy to show you. And oh God, thank you for bearing with me. Doesn't even quit, does it?
I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. There are some refreshments still. I'm sure Peter would answer questions, take questions.
I'm sorry. It's supposed to be an hour long.
And thank you again very much. Have a good evening.